Medical knowledge doubles every 73 days and it's not slowing down. There's this big opportunity to actually make general medical knowledge very concise and very accessible for clinicians. I've seen this phase where now everything is solvable with AI. Every single problem that you see in the day-to-day, like the LLM can do. And it's just kind of become a product problem now. It was kind of this universally agreed on problem in healthcare where, if you could solve this, that's the holy grail. There was this light bulb moment where we were like, of course, these tools aren't getting adoption if they're giving one-size-fits-all models to everybody. Let's really meet clinicians in the middle and create the most customizable AI platform, particularly for the specialists that also have struggles with documentation.
Welcome to Building with AI, the show where we engage in conversations with world-class AI product builders and leaders. We help uncover tactical insights to help you build and scale better AI products. I'm your host, Hamza Choudery, and today we're joined by Akilesh Bapu, the CEO and founder of DeepScribe, a health tech company that uses LLMs and NLP to augment clinical documentation. Akilesh grew up watching his dad, an oncologist, slog over tedious documentation tasks. Inspired by his father and their shared vision of a Jarvis-like assistant for doctors, he dove into the intersection of healthcare and AI. During the episode, he discusses his experience training custom NLP models, how DeepScribe responded to the ChatGPT moment, the importance of AI evaluation and testing, the future of DeepScribe and Ambient AI, and much more. But before we dig in, here's a quick word from our sponsor. Autoblocks is the leading AI evaluation platform for product teams. It enables your team to collaboratively iterate on prompts, model parameters, and RAG parameters, while letting you retain full control over whatever frameworks or tech stack you want to build with. Seamlessly run tests to evaluate the impact of product changes on quality. Learn how to ship more reliable LLM products at autoblocks.ai. Now, back to the episode. Welcome to the show, Akilesh.
Thanks for having me, Hamza.
Yeah, we're super excited to chat. Really incredible journey you've had at DeepScribe, really interesting vantage point into the evolution of NLP and AI more broadly. To kick things off, would love to hear a bit more about yourself, what got you interested in the AI space, and how you ended up working at the Bear Lab.
Yeah, absolutely. So my journey into AI actually, it kind of started almost, I would say, a decade or so ago. And healthcare kind of gets sandwiched in between. And what I mean by that is, I grew up basically spending the summers at my dad, who's an oncologist, kind of private practice. And I would see a lot of the kind of mundane tasks or clerical work he had to do as a clinician, everything from writing down paper charts to making orders to faxing information to patients. And, my dad would always share this kind of vision of an ideal workplace. And that was actually when a lot of the Iron Man movies were coming out. And he would always share that he wanted a Jarvis for clinicians. And that would be the true interface of the future. And as a kid, I was obsessed with personal assistant, and that kind of love for exploring what's possible there, got formalized into NLP, especially when it started exponentially growing as a field. And so when I was at Berkeley, there was a lot of amazing work that was being done at the AI lab there. And, I got to work on a couple projects under Professor Binyu and Jamie Murdoch. And I got to see kind of the problem statement change almost dramatically from when I started to when I left the lab to start DeepScribe. Initially, it was all about how to get these language models to write grammatically correct sentences. Believe it or not, that was what we were dealing with. That was a lot of the reasons for errors. And then, when I left the lab, AI was coherently summarizing full CNN news articles. And this was a time span of about 3 years. So it was clear to me that AI was exponentially growing. And then the reason I started with the sandwich is, I was doing all this amazing work at the lab and seeing all this amazing progress. And then I would go back home and spend time with my dad. And his workflow from when I was a kid to then when I was a researcher out of college had not changed at all. It was like I was traveling a decade into the past. He was using the same tech, same process, spending the same time on documentation. So that's when I kind of saw this opportunity in what we currently work on at DeepScribe, and that kind of nicely came full circle where I could apply some of the interest in AI back into my dad's private practice and solve this very real problem that healthcare is facing.
Before we dig into DeepScribe's product and peel back a layer there, would love to hear about how you compartmentalize the evolution of NLP since you entered the space and what the advent of LLMs really means for the space.
Yeah, I think that TLDR, especially in healthcare and industries that I would describe as have been late adopters to the AI revolution, believe it or not, kind of have seen this phase where now everything is solvable with AI. Every single problem or most problems that you see in the day-to-day, like the LLM can do. And it's just kind of become a product problem now. What I mean by that is, when we started the company back in 2018, and previously how NLP was done, you would have to collect this massive data set. You would have to clean it, you'd have to tune it, and then train your own model in-house, go through weeks of training and evaluation until you release the product into the wild. And at DeepScribe, it wasn't good enough by itself, so you had to attach a human reviewer. So it took a lot of effort to get heavier models to do more complex tasks out. But then, once the kind of LLM revolution began, a lot of those problems got quickly solved. And so now you can solve these fairly big challenges in healthcare, or at least get an MVP out quickly and iterate. And a lot of customers are happy to iterate with you. So that's how I would kind of describe this advent of LLMs where, all of a sudden, all these complex problems that you needed tons of training data and weeks for are now solved in front of you. And so now you have to figure out the product part of it, which I think tends to be the more fun part.
That's incredible. And do you see a future where traditional NLP models and LLMs are working together? Is there a place for some of those older models to still be integrated into the product? How do you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the way we've seen the best performance is in that combination where you get a very or much smaller domain-specific model that's trained on domain-specific data, guide the LLM on where it should be generating text or generating input or information. So, in healthcare for DeepScribe, it means, identify the topics that are important in this conversation and then dig into them. And so the identification is done by a more classical model, and it's really good at that. And that's where the kind of accuracy really, really matters and is important. But then the generation, you can have some kind of creative output in terms of how, like, which words you decide to use and whether or not you want to elaborate more deeply. And I think for that, LLMs do great. So I do see a future in which these native classical models are working with larger language models to get the most accurate output.
It would be great to hear about the DeepScribe product and what it really embodies before we dig in a bit more questions I'd like to ask around how it's evolved. But yeah, can we get an overview of how a doctor would use the product, what the value add is? I know you mentioned that burnout is a real issue in the industry. Would love to hear a bit more about that.
Yeah, so kind of continuing the story, back at the lab, my co-founder and I saw this opportunity to save my dad some time and, adjacently colleagues of his. And so I think the first big challenge that we identified was that a lot of the information that makes it into this note that clinicians are spending hours in their day writing comes from the conversation. And so if you were to put a microphone in the conversation and record that content, then you could fill out most of the note. But we weren't the first to come up with that idea. it was kind of this universally agreed on problem in healthcare where, if you could solve this, that's the holy grail. And so that meant big companies like the Microsofts or Googles of the world already have work in the space. You had a ton of VC-backed companies playing in this space as well. So we really wanted to be kind of precise about what our unique kind of angle here is in solving this problem. And one of the big opportunities we saw was that a lot of folks were applying one-size-fits-all models. So an oncologist who sees a lot of follow-up patients and pull forwards their notes for the most part gets the same model as a primary care doc that treats a completely different type of problems and completely different types of patients. So that's kind of the opportunity we saw. And there was this light bulb moment where we were like, of course, these tools aren't getting adoption if they're giving one-size-fits-all models to everybody. Let's really meet clinicians in the middle and create the most customizable AI platform, particularly for the specialists that also have struggles with documentation. That was kind of the first opportunity. The second one was that, if you could potentially get an AI into the room, then you have this ability to deliver bidirectional feedback at the point of care. And that's how you can actually alter the patient's clinical outcomes for the better with AI. And so there's this big opportunity to actually make that knowledge, both your knowledge that you collect with DeepScribe, as well as general medical knowledge, very concise and very accessible for clinicians. So that was the goal for DeepScribe early on. And so, over the last few years, I would describe our journey as three phases. The first phase was what we call data collection. And so we collected data from all types of specialties, all types of clinicians by selling primarily to private practices around the country. And we quickly grew. And I think one of the reasons was because we gave clinician the ability to get rid of their documentation load for the first time. It was powerful. And so that was really fun. The product essentially recorded the conversation and generated a note that went straight into the clinician's EHR. And then we added a ton of customization on it so that every clinician basically got their own personal model. It would write in their style, it would write in their format, it would use their templates. And that was kind of the key to adoption early on. And then the second phase for us was actually seeing this kind of evolution in LLMs, and then that making the product even more customizable for larger systems and larger healthcare organizations. And so once ChatGPT got released, healthcare kind of saw this coming, and there was this big trend of health systems. And I think today the stat is about 80% of health systems are looking to adopt generative AI by 2026, which is incredible. And so we moved up market and got our first kind of handful of healthcare systems that are using DeepScribe for a wide majority of their providers across multiple specialties. And again, this is a testament to customization. So that was phase 2. And then phase 3 now is what we call ambient intelligence. So delivering feedback back to the clinician in real time to actually help them with their decision making and help them deliver the highest quality care to the patients. So that's what the product is going to look like tomorrow. And we have some exciting pilot work in that segment that we're looking to announce soon.
That's awesome. Really excited to see what that looks like. When we talk about the introduction of LLMs, I know that you mentioned that a human was in the loop reviewing a lot of these notes up until a few months ago. Does that transition to a fully automated note generation solution track to the introduction of large language models, or were there other things behind the curtains that contributed to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's twofold. So the data that we had, because it was human labeled, was very, very high quality. And so when DeepScribe was human loop, we were part of a little over 3 million conversations, and each of those were human annotated, both from a transcript and note standpoint. And having that data meant very, very high quality data set that we could then use to train these larger open source LLMs that have recently been released. And so you have this parallel trend of more data, but then you also have more powerful models. And so over time, your data set becomes more and more valuable and leads to higher model quality. So that was very good to see. And so I think at a certain point, in the middle of last year, we saw the AI outperforming our best human scribes. And that was when we realized that it was a time that, I think the data was good enough, the models available were good enough. And so it was off to the races and reducing the human load and giving clinicians a fully automated product.
That's awesome. I was listening to your conversation with Matt Turk, and he kind of posed a question that was, I'll paraphrase, but he said, were you frustrated when LLMs came around because you had done all this work on the NLP front? But what I'm hearing from you is that it's not that you scrapped all of that work. It's more of another evolution, another chapter of the product's maturity. And I'm sure the institutional knowledge on the team, understanding what the precedent for NLP is before the introduction of LLMs, contributes a lot to their ability to execute on delivering a great product with LLMs as well. Would you concur with that?
Yeah, you're completely right. I mean, I think from the beginning, on a deeper level, the reason my co-founder Matt and I started DeepScribe was because we saw this future world of healthcare where AI partners with the clinician to deliver the best possible outcome to the patient. And that's what we're building towards. And so, when ChatGPT came out, when these open source LLMs came out, we were the opposite of frustrated. It was kind of like a blessing, because now all of a sudden, the node generation problem becomes a lot more tractable, but so do the other problems that still need to be solved in healthcare. And so kind of the messaging that I share with the team all the time is, sure, like maybe it feels like this one problem that we've been working on becomes easier, but there's a world of opportunity in healthcare and a lot of problems that need to be solved, and still not enough people working on those future problems. And so we should look forward and use this new kind of unlock that LLMs have brought us, and continue to expand the offering to solve these bigger problems in healthcare. So yeah, we were super happy these LLMs came out, and I think it's not like the way models were trained completely changed. The same NLP fundamentals apply, and so the same data applies, the same infrastructure that we built applies. So we're fairly well positioned to kind of embrace this innovation in-house.
When ChatGPT did, catch the public's eye by storm and became really the focal point of a lot of the conversations in tech, how did your team have to shift, either in composition and mindset? Like what was the on the ground shift after LLMs became a lot more pervasive?
That's a great question. We think about that a lot, and I think that's one of the, highest priority topics that I think every founder, especially from a startup standpoint, as well as from an incumbent standpoint, should be thinking about. The two things that I think I saw our team kind of completely change is, one, everybody became a prompt engineer overnight. In our problem space, the little things like the style of the output, the formatting, the type of information, the potential like next low-hanging fruit there that can be captured by building, all of that is top of mind in customer interactions. So having our customer success team especially become prompt engineers made last mile customization super easy, because all of a sudden clinicians would come to us with feedback and they could tune the solution on the fly, which is powerful. But then they could bring all these amazing ideas from the customer directly to the product team in a way that they had never been able to before. And so I would start seeing these Slack messages where instead of saying, can we build this? It would be, hey, can we build this? Here is a prompt that I saw that worked. Can we just use this and get this output? I know it works. Product team can work with that a lot more easily. And it also speeds up development timelines, because once you know something is tractable and you have that precise of a specification, really fast to build. So that helped us build product lightning quick. And so that was, I think, number one. Number two is we had to be really intentional about the change to automation. I think, the dream from the beginning of the company was that the AI would get better and better, and then we would switch on to fully automated. But what we realized after is it works until you get to about 80%. But the last 20%, you have to kind of take the leap for that. And you have to kind of almost rethink how the product works with the AI backend component and the human loop component that won't be there, as if you're delivering the solution straight to the clinician. That means surfacing them a lot more transparency in why the AI is making certain decisions, giving them the functionality to edit the note, giving them the functionality to tune the models from a last mile standpoint. So I think that was the second big learning for us, is to be intentional.
Awesome. There are so many techniques and approaches to getting a large language model to perform the way that you want it to, between prompt engineering, fine-tuning, RLHF, pre-training. I'm curious to hear if you have a mental model for how you think about these different techniques and the applicability of them in your product.
Specifically RLHF or just general?
Just generally, at what point you would think about fine-tuning or pre-training a model versus just relying on prompt engineering. And if you are doing any RLHF, would be really curious to hear about what that looks like in practice.
Got it. Okay, yeah. So generally how the team operates is we like to just do the initial MVP with prompt engineering. And so with the customers that we work with today, healthcare systems are very, very particular about their data. A lot of them actually do not want us to use third-party foundation models. And so the actual production AI that generates the notes can be completely in-house LLM hosted within oftentimes their own VPC in their cloud. But then for new features, we make sure that they're okay with us rapid prototyping with foundation models. So that kind of emulates the structure we work with at DeepScribe. So prototyping with foundation models and prompt engineering. That way everybody can collaborate, everybody can do it, and get to a solution fast. But then once you try to go to production, then there are other things like data privacy, security, as well as just general accuracy that we have to kind of nail down. And that's where the domain-specific data that we have and the in-house LLM that we have really pays off.
Got it. Really helpful. And can you talk about the division of responsibilities within your EPD org? I know you have an engineering team, you have a product team, you have a clinical team or a research team. So when you're thinking about AI product development, what are the different building blocks amongst all these teams to really create a well-oiled machine?
You asked about the transition earlier. I think one of the things that we've really shifted recently was, previously we had a product team, we had an engineering team, and we had an AI team. And the AI team would be responsible for taking requests and building new models, handling the data set and building the infrastructure. Then the engineering team would build a lot of product around it, and then the product team would kind of guide both. But with the launch of LLMs, because a lot of that heavy duty training is no longer necessary, at least to the extent that was done before, we really verticalized our team around the different product surface areas that we have. And so now you have, if you're looking at our ambient intelligence offerings, you have, product and then engineering and then AI all on the same team. And of course, AI will probably be working on the more heavy duty model training, model tuning tasks. So that kind of organizationally just increased the surface area of what we could work on. So I think the big shift was just verticalizing the team around product areas. And I think that that works really well, at least from our standpoint in this AI first world. So you kind of want that old structure.
Awesome. And is prompt engineering prototyping responsibility shared amongst the product and eng folks? How do you think about that?
That's something we're still trying to figure out. Everybody, it seems like, is prompt engineering right now in their own regard. And then the official prompt engineering is still done by the AI team. We've seen both extremes. We've seen situations in which some problems are too hard to prompt engineer from outside of AI. And then we've seen other problem areas where, for example, one of our PMs in a couple hours built a new custom model for orthopedic surgeons that they really, really liked. And so we're trying to figure out, where that cutoff is. So it's really a matter of iteration. But right now, I think there is a healthy balance of a lot of folks trying to cover that prompt engineering surface area.
Got it. And since you removed humans from the loop from reviewing notes before they go to doctors, how are you managing evaluation at scale, understanding the quality of these notes?
Yeah, so, one of the beauties of having a hero loop team is that we had this collection of experts within DeepScribe when it came to model evaluation. Because in order to train a human to do a task, you have to evaluate them as well, and you have to hire them, and you have to interview them and train them. And so you have this robust evaluation framework that we've built over time. And so we have about 64 different types of defects that we measure on a healthcare note, everything from basic missing information all the way to hallucinations, all the way to duplications, which is actually a fairly big challenge with LLMs, all the way to style, structure, formatting. And so we basically have split that framework into a fully automated component where you actually have these language models evaluating themselves off of a rubric, because a lot of the language questions are fairly unstructured. So, you could write a perfect output in two completely different ways, and your typical classic NLP metrics would think on a word level, one is less accurate than the other, right? But then, the GPT-4 would do a great job at figuring out if it was correct. And then you have the manual human based tasks. So your final output that we make every new model go through before going to production, where you actually have a team of human reviewers review the note on those same rubrics. And we actually do see some delta between what the AI audited. And so that human loop team recently became a trust and safety team. And so they're the ones that gate the release of each model and kind of deliver feedback on how good the model is before it gets released. So that's kind of what model evaluation looks like here at DeepScribe.
The trust and safety team, are those folks with domain expertise, or they're just well trained on, like, are they actual medical scribes and doctors, or are they just really well versed in assessing note quality?
So the management of the team is actually primarily from the self-driving industry. So we have a few ex-Waymo and ex-Neuro folks that have built evaluation criteria there. So they're really good at figuring out, kind of in an AI first way, how do you take this medically complex challenge and turn it into an AI challenge. The actual auditors that are reviewing these nodes, the labelers, the kind of humans in the loop, they are ex-medical scribes. So they're the ones that have the medical background, and we take their feedback in when it comes to rubric generation. But this blend we found is pretty healthy, where you have kind of folks that have done it really well in other parts of the industry work with industry experts to develop a strong framework.
Awesome. Aside from evaluation, I'm curious to hear about any other pain points or sort of insights that you have from working with non-deterministic systems. How does product building need to evolve to accommodate this sort of new magical technology we're incorporating in, seems like every product on the planet?
Yeah, you're going to love this answer, but I think one of the big challenges we have, and one of the big bottlenecks at DeepScribe, is how fast you can test and evaluate a model before deploying it to production. So you can only build product as fast as you can evaluate models. I think that's what we've seen has kind of come to light in this way of working. So we're constantly trying to make our evaluation frameworks and evaluation process a lot faster, trying to figure out how to automate more of that manual component without deteriorating quality. Because that's one of the things that we do really well here at DeepScribe that a lot of folks in healthcare have not been able to execute on by cutting corners, is the actual quality of the product. So that's really the big challenge for us that we're trying to solve. And we have new creative ideas every day about how to automate more and more, but that's kind of how I would describe that problem. It is a challenge here at DeepScribe.
I'd love to shift focus back to the origins of DeepScribe and talk a bit about go-to-market in the early innings. I know that a unique approach on your end was to target private practices instead of going after these large health systems early on. I'd love to hear about what drove that decision. I'm assuming your father and his friends might have contributed to that being attractive, but just what are some insights that founders can gain from the way that you approach that initial wedge and then expanded down the road?
Yeah. So our first go-to-market motion, as every startup usually has, is founder-led sales. And so, my co-founder and I at that point lived in Berkeley. And so we went on to Google Maps. Our search query was health systems. And so we mapped out all the different health systems in SF and got on his Vespa, drove around, and knocked on everyone's doors and tried to sell them DeepScribe. And we tried a bunch of different angles. We tried coming in as research scientists. We tried coming in as seed founders. None of it worked. In fact, on that day, we actually lost money because he got a parking ticket on his Vespa. So it was clear that, that outbound sales in healthcare was very tricky, especially when your product space lacked awareness, lacked exposure. And we did notice that, especially when you spend time with clinicians, they're doom scrolling through Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and searching all over the place for things that they're curious about in the evenings. And so we thought, if clinicians kind of have the same behavior as most consumers, why not use tactics that have worked in consumer-facing industries in this domain? And so we switched completely to digital marketing, spent a lot of time owning our inbound funnel, and spent a lot of time increasing our search position as well as advertising on social, SEO, SEM. And we actually had this amazing tailwind with COVID because all of a sudden clinicians increased their digital presence. So it all came together and really exploded our initial growth. And so we saw a lot of the initial leads as private practices. And so we saw this big segment, about 50% of all clinicians in the US are private practice docs that were clearly willing to buy this product and have sales cycles of often less than a day, versus health systems that were not looking, had like over a year-long sales cycle. So that's what led us to really focus on private practice segment, really refine the product. And at a certain point, once we got enough traction there, not only did the tailwind of ChatGPT kind of help health systems think about it a little bit differently, but then also the word of mouth really helped DeepScribe generate more awareness in the health system segment. And that really fueled this transition up market, where clinicians within Texas Oncology were like, hey, like I use DeepScribe at my practice. Can we use this organization wide? And then they were led to start kind of looking at DeepScribe as a real solution.
Awesome. And fast forward to today, it's one of the hottest spaces in healthcare. And I'm curious to hear about what led to you prioritizing this vision for ambient AI as the next foray for DeepScribe.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think the term ambient really means an AI that can proactively listen in the background and create tasks, do tasks for you. We want clinicians to be able to turn their chair back to the patient and really maintain eye contact, really, hear what they're saying and make the best possible decision for their patient. I saw previous recollections from clinicians prior to EHRs where they would actually have a full day of patients, maybe see 25, 30, and then actually get on the phone with their patients in the evening and share with them the results, ask them how they're doing, and really built this human connection that actually had great relationships to outcomes as well, because you were getting as much context as you could to make the best decision. Fast forward today, those 30 patient workloads are being cut down to like 15 or 10, and a lot of that time is spent documenting. And so by taking the documentation off the clinician's shoulders and really having them focus on the patient, you can make a big difference in care outcomes and also the clinician's work-life balance and quality of life. So that's what we call ambient documentation. But I think we're at the point where not only is there an opportunity to make clinicians more efficient, but there's also an opportunity to make clinicians and healthcare professionals smarter. And so that kind of forays into ambient intelligence. And when you look at health systems that are currently deploying DeepScribe, the most frequent question we get asked is, hey, like, can we run analytics? Can we ask questions based off these conversations? And can you actually deliver insights back to patients? Not only is there a great financial outcome from that, because a lot of health systems have payment models where the coverage of diagnoses or the recapture of diagnoses helps them cover their grounds, but then also helps the quality outcomes of the patients because you're covering their entire surface area. So if you, Hamza, come in to see a clinician and you're complaining about your chest pain, but then you also have a history of diabetes, a lot of the time the clinician's probably not going to check in on that diabetes because all that attention is being focused on chest pain. But then if you're able to nudge the clinician in real time to just make sure to check in on your A1C levels, for example, then that really helps both the health system financially, since that helps them decrease their risk, but then also helps you as a patient because you're really focusing. There's some like nice clear opportunities where there's both a financial and I guess patient focused outcome that can be achieved by ambient intelligence. And then once you solve some of those, then you bring on this new world where you actually have these co-pilot working hand in hand with clinicians to deliver the best possible outcome, which we're really excited about.
That's amazing. The dream of Jarvis for medicine is really still alive. Going deeper on specific specialties going to be a parallel path alongside this vision for ambient intelligence, where you continue to build out even more specialized models and continue to improve their ability to be effective?
The way we think about it is, in order to get ambient intelligence off the ground, you need adoption equally among the primary care docs as you do the specialists. And so we really think of our specialty focus as this way of creating custom models so that every clinician has access to an equal documentation solution, no matter which department they're in the health system. And so once we have that nice, even playing field, then we can start to deliver intelligence to everybody, not just a specific group of clinicians that decided to adopt ambient. So it's really sequencing rather than parallel, where now that we've kind of created this nice even playing field, we can start to make intelligence available to everybody.
Are there any regulatory risks in the space that you're operating in, especially if you're giving advice or insights to doctors? Does that present any risk, or does having a human in the loop mitigate that?
Yeah. So it's funny. So HIPAA was actually written in 1996. And so it predates a lot of the work people are doing in cloud, a lot of the work we're doing in AI. And so the encryption standards are fairly basic. And so we like to just stay ahead of the curve and adopt the best practice cloud security methods to keep data safe. So from that standpoint, I think we're good. I think as kind of this intelligence area evolves, there will be this very real question, especially when you start to see clinicians really rely heavily on ambient intelligence, on where the liability stands. A lot of liability currently stands on clinicians and within healthcare systems. And as a company, we invest a lot in our evaluation criteria to make sure that whatever result we're delivering is well intentioned and well audited and as deterministic as possible. But as the surface area of the problem space starts to expand, that'll become harder and harder. So we'll continue to invest in that. We've been partnering with a lot of our health system partners to make sure that we can come up with something that collectively makes sense. And there are a lot of great kind of consortiums being spun up, especially here on the West Coast, like Chai and Valid AI, that make it their kind of sole focus to ensure that AI is deployed safely in healthcare. And so by being part of those organizations and contributing a lot of the evaluation criteria that we've shared, hopefully we can create this industry standard for what's safe and not safe in medicine. So that's a long answer to your question. Short answer is, it doesn't exist today, but we definitely see it existing in the future.
And now that you are working with larger health systems, I'm curious to hear about how you maintain discipline when it comes to your product roadmap and focus on the problems that you set out to build. I can imagine that since there's so much opportunity in the healthcare delivery space, especially the opportunity for AI to come in and disrupt a lot of arcane workflows and methods, would be curious to hear about how you maintain that focus.
Yeah, it's tricky, especially because every healthcare system is just so different and they have their own needs. So really trying to centralize on a product roadmap that accounts for all these needs and tries to give DeepScribe the most optimal product strategy may mean that we're prioritizing certain customers over others, or having certain customers wait for a long time for a customization request that they asked for in order to further innovate intelligence. So I think a lot of our product is really just driven around our key mission statement to bring the joy of care back to medicine by helping AI and healthcare professionals work together in harmony. And so, that means that a lot of times we do prioritize intelligence over maybe last mile customizations, or it could also mean prioritizing additional workflow expansion over intelligence in certain cases. That there's groups of clinicians that have this big workload unlock that we could do to give them equal access to some of the intelligence features that come later. So it's always a challenge, and to everyone I've spoken to, no matter what stage you're at as a company, will continue to be a challenge. So just being mission driven, but then also making sure we're listening to our customers is really the only way to solve it effectively.
Awesome. And do you ever do doctors visits where you go and see users using DeepScribe in person? I'm curious to hear about the empirical sort of observations that you do to see how the product's performing.
That's my favorite thing to do. I love going on site and spending time with clinicians. I think, it's kind of funny. One of the things I realize is a lot of clinicians have this like crazy amount of untapped potential where they're either, they have a degree in computer science, and so they've coded their own solutions to various problems, or they see the world in a completely different way than, a lot of the mainstream media talks about. And so it's just fun to go brainstorm with them and bring these ideas to life. But I think one of my favorite kind of customer on-sites was, I visited one of our health systems in Louisiana, and I was asking the CMIO what the general feedback has been like for DeepScribe. And I was like, how are you liking it? And he's like, well, don't take my word for it. And then he screen shared his email and then pulled up all the love letters he got from his clinicians. And these were all organic. They were thanking him for deploying this software. They were saying it changed their lives. And obviously I asked him to forward all the emails to me so we could put a testimonial out. But it's great to see. I think the effect is truly visceral. And it gives us a lot of confidence that we're solving a very real problem. And also the kind of illumination that, sitting here at the SF office, there's a lot going around you that you don't know until you go on site. And so I make it a point to go out to one of our sites at least every couple of weeks.
When you think about the health tech space more broadly, are there other spaces beyond documentation that excite you, even if they're outside of the purview of DeepScribe? Would be curious to hear about what you think is real in terms of the opportunity and potential versus things that you are a bit more skeptical on.
Yeah, I really, really like to see a world in which testing is a lot more accessible. A lot of the kind of decision making around like who to administer tests to and who not to is based statistically on like the likelihood of that person having a fatal response as a result. And so, a 26-year-old that has excruciating back pain is probably a lot less likely to get an MRI done than, a 52-year-old. But just because they're 2% likely to have a fatal outcome doesn't mean they shouldn't deserve that test. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity there to innovate, make them more accessible, use the smartphone, use smarter devices that are just better from a general compute standpoint to run these tests. And I already see a lot of amazing work being done here. But a world in which you have frequent accessible testing that potentially could be unintrusive and can preventative medicine a lot more achievable is a world I definitely want to live in. So that's kind of how I think of like the hardware part of the challenge, and then you have the software challenge that I think a lot of it, which is in DeepScribe's purview, which is to make a smart enough AI that's helping from a data standpoint a clinician determine the best care with the signals that they currently have from the patient.
Awesome. And we like to ask all of our guests this question. Do you have any contrarian takes on the AI space, any hot takes that you want to share with our audience?
That's a great question. I'm trying to decide what I should share and not share. I have a bunch of contrarian takes. I think the one I'll probably share is that there are a lot of companies that I still see that are kind of positioning themselves as like as if AI is not going to get better and position themselves like anti-AI. But I think everybody should be thinking about, as a simple example, GPT-4, GPT-5, GPT-6, just commoditizing a lot of their tasks that they spend a lot of time solving so that they can really focus and expand their breadth and depth beyond the core task that maybe that has been a core competency for a while, and solve some of the bigger problems out there. It's a very generic answer, but I definitely don't want to share some of
the proprietary takes.
At least maybe ask me in a year.
For sure. Curious to hear about how you felt seeing the GPT-4o demo, seeing multimodal really have its moment. Curious to just hear about what the reaction was at the DeepScribe office.
It was definitely very underrated, right? You have a lot of people that think they just stitch together, I guess, text generation LLM with like their speech-to-text engine Whisper and then their voice generation engine. But that wasn't the case. It's truly multimodal, and it's very impressive to see that level of performance. And we've already seen some like early potential at DeepScribe here to actually help with some of that speech-to-text stuff and help deliver the context without losing a lot of the information in our task. But it's kind of the first foray into a real end-to-end Jarvis, and I think it could be super, super powerful. And I'd love to see open source also kind of catch up in that regard and develop open source models that are as productive so that we can also leverage a lot of our data to make them better.
I'm sure having consumers become more comfortable with the idea of multimodal AI and interacting with it through voice would be a good tailwind for DeepScribe's product as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think what a lot of people don't give enough credit to is kind of how the launch of ChatGPT has changed everybody's perspective to kind of think that now a lot of the problems that they face in the world can actually be solved with AI, and that it should not be something that they're scared of or averse to. And to see it actually work to the effect that it has in a field like healthcare is truly amazing. I mean, you had these CMIOs or CIOs coming to us and they're like, hey, like, can we solve this, and this? And we're like, yeah, we can. But I'm super surprised that you were able to come to us with that problem statement. And they're like, yeah, I was spending this morning prompt engineering this on ChatGPT and I like the output. So I'd like you guys to build it. So I think it's this like nice world in which everybody can collaborate no matter which domain they're in. You don't have to be a computer scientist to build great products anymore. And I think that's really how you further the world. So super happy about that.
I'm curious to hear about how much manual labor is going into delivering a specific product experience. The fact that you're willing to focus on internal tooling for auditors early on and then meet this moment when LLMs came into the picture to automate things. How do you kind of think about, being a SaaS business versus a services business, the right balance? And oftentimes you need to do things that don't scale, but how do you know the right things to apply that framework?
It's definitely a tough one. And I think most of the time anyone starts with human in the loop, or actually all the time that they start with human in the loop, they're usually wrong about when it's going to be fully automated. But I think the real question is like from an economic standpoint, like, do you need it to be fully automated for your company to be successful, for you to deliver a product offering? And so from DeepScribe's standpoint, like, we didn't think about it as, do we have a human or not? And that's holding us back. We thought about it as, what are the scaling implications here? What is the gross margin that we're able to perform at? And as long as we're able to solve that, then get it to a point where we're happy, our board is happy, that's usually kind of the check mark. And so we found a way early on to have SaaS-like gross margins or close to SaaS-like gross margins with a human. Now in this AI world, it's obviously a lot easier because AI can do a lot of tasks that humans can't. At the same time, you do need high quality data to train these models. So you still have to balance that cost. But yeah, as long as the fundamental economics of the business are strong, I think that's probably the best framework that at least we found to guide that thinking.
Awesome. This has been super insightful. Just one final question for you before we conclude. Would love to hear your thoughts on just how the API model versus open source model debate's going to shake out, your POV on that.
Like, who wins at the end, who uses open source and who uses foundation models?
Specifically when thinking of, businesses like DeepScribe, do you think that we're headed towards a world where open source models that are fine-tuned on specific use cases are going to be more prevalent, or is there going to be a need for generalizable models like a GPT? How do you just see that sort of market share playing out for B2B?
I would probably say that, our specific vantage point is that we haven't seen enough confidence from either side that one will be able to competently perform a task better than the other. So like open source models can be small, very accurate, and very fast as a result, which sounds amazing, but then you have to make sure that they're competent at every task before you're able to release it. Foundation models just out of the gate are very, very smart, very slow, but you don't have all the edges and stuff are really refined. So it's easier to release into the wild and have less glaring issues. So, I hope that both will continue to challenge each other and innovate. I think that's the best world for us. But what we've done at DeepScribe is we've just created a way in which you have great evaluation frameworks that can be used for both. And so at any given point, if GPT-6 is way better than our in-house LLM model, or Claude is better than GPT-4o, or Gemini is better than both, then we can really easily switch them out and make it customer specific as well. So for the customers that don't want third-party foundation models in their stack, they get the open source LLM and we know exactly what they're missing and what they're getting. But then customers that are open to it may get a fully foundation model powered solution, maybe more expensive, maybe more accurate, but having a good evaluation framework and a good infrastructure set to be able to choose, I think is kind of how we've solutioned against that problem.
Thank you so much for all of the insights today, Akilesh. This has been incredible. I'm confident that our audience will find a lot of actionable insights in this podcast.
Yeah, thanks again for having me, Hamza.
Of course.